Hey guys, tonight we begin with the surprisingly structured, brutally honest and often misunderstood life of a medieval prostitute, a woman who contributed to the economy in very practical ways. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the gentle sound of someone retching in the alley below your window, which is actually more of a hole in the wall with cloth nailed over it, because glass is for churches and people who get paid more than 4 copper coins a night. The room, generously referred to as a chamber, measures roughly the size of a pig pen. Coincidentally, it smells like one too. The walls are timber, stained, and bowed in a way that makes you wonder if the building itself has given up. The roof leaks when it rains, groans when it doesn't, and one of the floorboards moves with a worrying squelch. You stopped asking why months ago. Your mattress is a lumpy sack of straw stuffed with dreams, back pain, and the occasional flea with a drinking problem. You shift. Something crunches beneath you. You tell yourself it's just an almond from last week's festival that you didn't attend. There's no pillow, just a bundle of rags that may once have been a tunic. You curl it under your neck, scratch at a bite on your arm, and stare at the ceiling beam with the faint hope that today won't involve a friar with a foot fetish and poor hygiene. You say a quick prayer to St. Mary Magdalene, patroness of your profession sort of, and throw off your blanket. It's damp. It always is. Across the narrow hall, you hear Gertrude finishing her shift. She giggles, then coughs, then mutters something about rats. She's been here longer than you and claims she once bedded a nobleman. No one believes her. But we all appreciate the optimism. The madam's footsteps creak on the stairs. You tense. She's holding her ledger and shouting about unpaid fees, torn linens, and someone using the good honey soap. Again, you get up quickly. No time for self-pity. Not when you're behind on rent, low on rouge, and expected to be downstairs in 10 minutes for your first customer. A city guard with halitosis and a thing for compliments. You've already practiced your flattery. You splash some water on your face. It's cold enough to remind you you're alive, but not enough to make you feel clean. You sigh, straighten your back and mutter, "Another glorious day in paradise." And with that, your shift begins. You begin your day the way any professional would, trying to remember if that stain on your shift dress is wine, blood, or last night's stew. You sniff it. You regret it. It's stew. Probably. There's a cracked ceramic basin in the corner of your room, filled with water that's been sitting overnight, just long enough to be freezing, but not long enough to grow something. You splash it on your face. It's an instant cure for sleepiness and a reminder that plumbing is something future people will brag about. You reach for a sliver of soap. It's not there. You curse Gertrude again. She's known for borrowing personal items without the courtesy of pretending to return them. Instead, you scrub under your arms with a handful of rough linen and a prayer. Hygiene is optional. Odour is inevitable. Your hair is a mess. That's actually a compliment. You comb it with your fingers, which are raw from scrubbing linens last night, and tie it back with a ribbon that used to be white before life happened to it. You think about putting on makeup, a dab of rouge, maybe some ash to contour your cheekbones, but decide that a tired look is in this season, especially if the client's too drunk to notice. Dressing is simple. You wear the uniform required by city ordinance, a faded red gown that loudly announces, "I am both available and taxable." It's a shade of red that says passion, penance, and legally sanctioned shame all at once. You slide on your shoes, mismatched, cracked, and blessedly yours, and step into the hallway where the air smells like boiled cabbage and bad decisions. Downstairs, you can already hear the madam shouting about unpaid debts and a misplaced loot. You don't ask. Before heading down, you do a quick check in the mirror. Well, the shiny piece of metal nailed to the wall. You smile. It's good enough. You've perfected the art of looking interested while dissociating. It's your most marketable skill. And as you descend the stairs, you're greeted by the scent of cheap ale, the sound of boots stomping mud onto the floorboards, and the unmistakable feeling that someone has already vomited in the fireplace. Welcome to Monday. Your first client of the day arrives just after the church bells finish ringing prime. He's early, eager, and smells strongly of flour and someone who sweats professionally. You recognize him. He's the baker from 2 streets over. Middle-aged, married, and always convinced he's your favourite. He greets you with a crooked grin and a fresh loaf of bread, as if carbohydrates count as currency. Technically, the madam accepts bread. Technically. She's also been eating it in secret and telling everyone your wages are behind again. You usher him into your chamber, which is still airing out from last night's vinegar rinse. He compliments your hair, which is greasy, your skin, which is blotchy, and your dress, which is regulation issue and smells faintly of boiled onions. You thank him anyway. Flattery is the real currency here. He undresses with the urgency of someone trying to win a race no one else signed up for. His tunic hits the floor. His hose sag depressingly. He asks if you remember him from last week. You lie and say yes. He beams. You go through the usual motions. You pretend he's charming. He pretends he's impressive. He lasts about the time it takes a monk to light a candle, then flops over, out of breath and full of compliments. You smile professionally, like a saint who's seen things and no longer flinches. He lingers, talks about his wife, says she doesn't understand him. You nod sympathetically, calculating whether the bread he brought is mouldy yet. Before he leaves, he places the loaf gently on your table like a man offering treasure. It's warm. You can't be mad. Bread is bread. And you haven't had warm anything since last feast day. Once he's gone, you check the coin pouch he left. 2 pennies short. Again. You sigh, pocket it, and make a mental note to add it to your growing tab. You consider nibbling the bread now, but decide to wait. If your next client doesn't show up, it'll be your consolation prize. You fluff the straw-stuffed mattress, straighten your gown, light a bit of dried lavender to reset the mood. A new day, a new disappointment. And that was just the morning rush. With the baker gone, and your dignity mostly intact, you head downstairs for breakfast, or as it's known in the brothel, whatever hasn't been stolen yet. The communal table is already surrounded by the rest of the girls, all in various states of disrepair. Marjorie is picking straw out of her hair. Beatrice is icing a mystery bruise with a cabbage leaf. Gertrude, as usual, looks far too pleased with herself, which probably means someone important paid her in actual coin. You slide into your spot, eyeing the breakfast offerings. A wooden plate with stale bread crusts, a chunk of yellow cheese that's sweating profusely despite the weather, and half a boiled onion. There's also a communal mug of watered-down ale. It's lukewarm and cloudy, like the future. You break off a bit of bread and try not to chip a tooth. Marjorie passes the ale mug. You hesitate. She had that cough last week, the one that sounded suspiciously like plague, but you drink anyway. It's that or eat the onion raw, and you still have clients scheduled. The conversation at the table flows like the River Thames, slow, filthy, and full of odd things floating in it. Gertrude is gossiping, loudly, about a knight who cried during the act and asked to be held. Beatrice claims she saw the mayor's wife sneaking out the back door last night. No one questions it. No one really wants to know. The madam appears suddenly like a tax collector in the fog. She eyes the bread, snatches the last edible bit for herself, and announces that the city inspector will be coming by this week. Groans echo around the table. This means scrubbing, actual mending, and pretending the walls haven't started growing things. You eye the leftover crust and slip it into your sleeve for later. Desperation makes excellent Tupperware. Just as you're starting to enjoy the cheese, possibly mould, possibly seasoning, the bell above the door rings. A new customer. Of course. You chew quickly, swallow even quicker, and adjust your dress so it looks less like you slept in it, which you did. The day has barely begun, and already you're rationing crumbs and contemplating your life choices, and you haven't even seen the priest yet. You're halfway through adjusting your corset with one hand and fishing breadcrumbs out of your sleeve with the other, when Gertrude lets out a dramatic sigh and announces to the room, "Well, it's back." Everyone freezes. Marjorie chokes slightly on her onion. Beatrice mutters, "Third time this season," without looking up from her stitching. "The itch," Gertrude continues, placing one hand on her hip and the other on her dramatically exposed collarbone. "It's come back with a vengeance, like an angry ex-boyfriend armed with a torch and a confession." No one is particularly shocked. Gertrude is a walking cautionary tale wrapped in rouge and bad decision-making. She insists it's from the foreign merchant she entertained last week, the one with the fur-trimmed boots and questionable jewellery. You strongly suspect it was the town scribe. Again. The madam appears in the doorway, holding her ever-growing debt ledger and what may or may not be a bottle of vinegar. "Scrubbing stations are open," she declares, gesturing toward a battered tin basin and a rag that's seen things no rag should ever see. Gertrude struts over like she's on parade and plops herself down with the grace of someone who's absolutely not worried about her pelvic reputation. "Honestly," she says to no one, "at least it's not the pox. That time with the nobleman? Face like a statue, touch like a rash." Marjorie passes her a clove of garlic. "For healing," she mutters, though everyone knows it's just an excuse to mask the smell. You wisely keep your distance and try not to make eye contact with the vinegar jug. You've been lucky so far, or selective, or both. Conversation continues over the sound of splashing and Gertrude humming something disturbingly cheerful. Someone brings up the rumour that a new brothel is opening near the docks. "With real curtains," Beatrice whispers, eyes wide. You all take a moment to dream. Curtains. Beds with mattresses thicker than a pie crust. Clients who don't fall asleep mid-sentence. Then reality returns. Gertrude yelps loudly as the vinegar hits its mark. You wince. The madam rolls her eyes, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls, because apparently even God is keeping score today. You grab your pouch, sigh deeply, and prepare for your next client. Preferably one without jewellery, just as you're contemplating a quiet moment to yourself. Maybe a nap, maybe a secret nibble of that crust from earlier. The front door creaks open, and in walks the bishop's nephew. He always arrives the same way, nervously, clutching a flask of sacramental wine, and with the kind of guilty expression usually reserved for tax collectors and dogs that just ate the roast. He's dressed in clerical grey, with a hood too big for his head, and shame leaking out of every pore. "Peace be with you," he mumbles, because he thinks that makes it more appropriate. "And also with your coin," you reply, smiling sweetly. He insists, as usual, that he's only here for confession. You nod like you haven't heard that 12 times before. His version of confession involves wine, trembling hands, and some rather confused theology about Eve, temptation, and something involving goats that you've never fully understood and are too polite to ask. He always brings a gift. Today it's dried figs wrapped in linen and a half-hearted poem about salvation. You accept both graciously. You are, after all, a woman of etiquette. You guide him to the back room. He asks if you've been praying for him. You tell him yes. You don't mention it was mostly praying he wouldn't come back. The act itself is a ritual, overly apologetic, surprisingly fast, and punctuated by him declaring he'll never return, which he always does, usually within 3 days. Afterward, he lies back and stares at the ceiling like it holds divine answers. You offer him a sip from his own wine. He declines. You take it. One must stay hydrated. He tries to pay you in silver, but the madam only accepts coin from him in person, something about unpaid dues and ecclesiastical immunity. Instead, he leaves the figs, another prayer, and a small wooden cross. "May God forgive us," he whispers at the door. You nod. He has good reason to at this point. As he exits, he bumps into Gertrude, who winks at him. He stumbles, blushes, and bolts like he's just seen a demon in fishnet stockings. You tuck the figs away for later. They're probably stale, but they're not mouldy, and that's a win. Now, time to air the room and find where you put that garlic clove. The merchant from last night mentioned coming back, and you have a feeling he's bringing feathers. After the bishop's nephew flees the premises like he's late for Judgment Day, you finally get a moment to sit down. You settle by the hearth with your lukewarm ale, stretch your aching feet, and begin to seriously consider stealing Marjorie's garlic clove for your own defence. That's when Beatrice bursts in holding a folded piece of parchment like it's the Magna Carta. "It's for you," she smirks, waving it dramatically. "From your secret admirer." The word secret is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. There are only 6 men in town who can write, and 4 of them are married. One is the bishop. The last one is the town scribe, a man who once tried to impress you by reciting Latin and nearly fell into a chicken coop. You unfold the parchment with the enthusiasm of someone unwrapping spoiled fish. It's written in what appears to be ink, though it could also be beet juice, and the handwriting is ambitious. Some of the letters are backwards. Some may not be letters at all. You begin to read aloud. "O fairest flame, thy hair is red, like stew at night when all are fed. I dream of thee by candle's light, though rats do squeak and bites do bite." There's a pause. Beatrice wipes a tear from her eye. From laughter, not emotion. You turn the parchment over, hoping there's a punchline. There isn't. Just a crude drawing of what might be a heart, or a potato with arrows. The poem is signed only, "Your Knight of Quills," which sounds poetic until you remember the scribe once stabbed himself in the hand trying to sharpen a feather. "Maybe he means well," Marjorie offers, peeking over your shoulder. "Maybe he's just deeply, profoundly bad at this." You consider keeping the poem. Then consider using it to start the fire. In the end, you fold it neatly and shove it into the hearth. It catches quickly. Like most things in your life, it's briefly bright, then vanishes into smoke. Still, part of you finds it charming. Not the poem. That was objectively terrible. But the idea that someone thought of you outside of business hours. You stare at the fire a little longer. Then Gertrude walks in wearing someone's missing belt as a headband and asks, "You gonna eat those figs or what?" Late afternoon brings with it the scent of sweat, overripe apples and coin, which can only mean one thing. A merchant has arrived. He's dressed in velvet that's seen better decades, jingling with trinkets that scream midlife crisis by sea route. His beard is oiled, his hat unnecessary, and his gaze lingers far too long on the chandelier that isn't there. He claims to have been everywhere. Alexandria, Genoa, even Paris, which he pronounces as if it were a type of meat. His boots are muddy, his teeth are suspiciously white, and he smells like someone who bathes in perfume to mask something more offensive. He does not ask for company. He demands an experience. The word he uses is exotic. He doesn't elaborate. They never do. "Surprise me," he says, which, in your line of work, ranks somewhere between a warning and a dare. You lead him to the back room that still faintly smells of incense from the bishop's nephew, and begin your mental inventory. There are a few props in the trunk: feathers, a cracked mask, one scarf that's barely held together by hope. Nothing screams exotic. Most of it barely whispers functional. So you improvise. You throw on the scarf as a veil. Add the cracked mask for mystique. Light a candle. You chant a nonsense phrase you once heard a drunk Hungarian say at a fair. It worked on a knight once. He thought it was pagan. The merchant claps, delighted. You haven't even done anything yet. He asks to be tied up. You comply. He requests honey. You offer molasses. He doesn't notice. He mumbles something about forbidden fruit while you try not to laugh. He accidentally knocks over the chamber pot during the theatrics, but considers it part of the ritual. The entire encounter is less passion and more performance art. When it's done, he tips generously. Gold, not silver, which means you'll finally get a full meal that doesn't involve turnips. He bows, mutters something about spiritual awakening, and leaves with your cracked mask as a souvenir. You stare at the door for a moment, then turn back to the spilled chamber pot and the slowly extinguishing candle. Exotic, indeed. By now the sun is limping its way down the sky, and with it comes the unmistakable stench of the tannery next door, a thick, pungent blend of rotting flesh, urine, and crushed dreams. It's as if the air itself decided to give up and embrace decay. The tanning pits are only separated from your establishment by a shared alley and a moral boundary that's just as flimsy. You've grown used to it, mostly. The smell settles on your skin like guilt, and no amount of lavender sprigs stuffed into your bodice can defeat it. Inside, things aren't much fresher. The common room reeks of sweat, spilled ale, and the kind of despair that can only be mopped up with hot vinegar and divine intervention. Gertrude is snoring on a bench. Beatrice is plucking lice from her bodice with the focus of a monk copying scripture. Marjorie is cleaning her teeth with the end of a quill. The quill might belong to your admirer. You don't ask. You return to your room, step over a puddle that might be water, probably not, and collapse onto the straw mattress, which groans louder than the client's. For a brief moment, you let yourself think. Not about the day, or the coins you've earned, or the molasses still in your hair. You think about what you'll eat tonight. Bread, if the rats haven't claimed it. Maybe a boiled root. You consider heating water for tea, then remember you used the last of the firewood 2 nights ago during an overly ambitious bath attempt. The walls are thin. You can hear next door's conversation through them. A merchant arguing with a washerwoman about goats, or maybe debts. Possibly both. A dog barks in the distance. Then someone retches below your window. You wonder if it's the bishop's nephew again. You light a tallow candle and hold your fingers close to it. Not for romance, but for warmth. Outside, the sky turns that bruised purple colour that always feels like the world is about to close for the night. And yet you're not done. The madam's voice echoes down the hall, sharp and unrelenting. Up! Another one's coming! Of course he is. You stand, stretch your back with the sound of several joints giving up, and reach for the wine-stained bodice. Showtime. Again, night in a medieval brothel is when things truly come alive, by which we mean louder, stickier, and far more likely to result in someone throwing up on your shoes. The alehouse down the lane has just spilled its contents into the streets, mostly drunk men, one bewildered goat, and a lute player with a black eye. They stagger toward your door like moths to a flame, if moths wore half-buttoned tunics and smelled like week-old onions. Inside, the air is thick with smoke, sweat, and the faint whiff of burning something. Could be a candle, could be dinner. Either way, no one's checking. The madam is in full bark mode, directing traffic like a general on the losing side of a war. Gertrude has smeared more rouge on her cheeks than a noblewoman's corpse. Beatrice is passed out with her eyes open, an impressive skill. And you're at your post near the stairs, pretending to look mysterious instead of exhausted. The clientele tonight is a glorious disaster. There's the toothless cooper who insists on singing before anything else. The apprentice mason who wants to practice kissing like the nobles do, which mostly involves drooling and apologising. And of course, the guy who paid with a chicken last time and is back to negotiate with eggs. You manage to avoid the worst of them, barely, and end up entertaining a blacksmith who has muscles, manners, and the emotional depth of a door. Still, he pays up front and doesn't talk much. A win, by local standards. The room is already hot when you lead him up the stairs. The candle sputters, the mattress sags, and you mentally check out somewhere between boot removal and awkward compliments. Afterwards, he falls asleep instantly. You nudge him with your toe. Nothing. He snores like a dying ox. You consider robbing him for sport, but settle for fishing out the rest of the coin and leaving before he rolls over and breaks your ribs. Downstairs, the music has turned to shouting. Someone's playing dice with the madam's rent money, A fight breaks out over who gets the clean goblet. There isn't one. You take a breath, then cough, and the night's just getting started. Just when you think the night has peaked, after the vomiting, the lute string snapping, and the guy who thought tipping was optional if he winked, in walks a knight, or at least someone claiming to be one. His armour is mostly rust, his helmet is missing, and he smells like he lost a joust to a pigsty. He's got a sword, though. It's dull, decorative, and possibly wooden, but he drags it behind him with all the gravitas of a man who definitely talks to it when no one's around. He slams a coin purse on the counter and proclaims he wants to rescue a maiden. The madam, without missing a beat, points at you. You don't even blink. This isn't the weirdest request you've had this week. That honour still belongs to the beekeeper who wanted to be stung emotionally. You lead him upstairs. He insists on taking the stairs valiantly, which involves tripping twice and reciting half of a poem that might be about horses. You nod politely, wondering if there's a saint for patience in this line of work. Inside the room, he demands a damsel in distress scenario. You oblige, sighing dramatically, and pretending to be imprisoned in the corner. He insists on saving you by kicking over a stool and declaring victory. You clap. He bows. The show continues. Then comes the role-play. He requests you call him Sir Gilbert the Moist, which you manage with a straight face only because you once had to call someone Captain Nipplehorn for 20 minutes. He recites more poetry, terrible, naturally, and insists on being gentle, despite your insistence that speed and silence are virtues at this hour. Eventually, things proceed. He's surprisingly nervous. You guide him gently, like one might guide a lost sheep or confused town official. Afterwards, he hands you a gold coin and a small pouch of herbs from his quest. You're 80% sure it's dried grass. He bows deeply and exits with a flourish, tripping one final time on the curtain. You sit for a moment in silence, then burst out laughing. Sometimes, absurdity is the only thing standing between exhaustion and existential dread. You pocket the coin and toss the herbs out the window. The noise has finally begun to die down. The lute player's passed out with his instrument cradled like a child. Gertrude is face down on the hearthrug, possibly dreaming of bishops. Beatrice is upright, but definitely unconscious. The madam is counting coins and muttering curses in 3 languages. You recognise at least 2. Your room is quiet now, save for the rhythmic drip from a leak in the ceiling and the occasional creak of old wood regretting its life choices. You light what's left of your last candle, a stub that smells vaguely of animal fat and desperation, and set it on the table. The floor is cold, your feet are sore. You remove your bodice with the delicacy of someone defusing a bomb and collapse onto the straw mattress that has now become your closest friend and worst enemy. Just as your eyes begin to close, there's a sound, a tiny squeak, followed by another. Rats. Again. You sit up with the speed of a crusader hearing the word relic. 2 beady eyes reflect the candlelight from under your trunk. Bold little devils. The one on the left has a scar. You've named him Rupert. He's practically a tenant at this point. You toss a stale crust in the opposite direction, and Rupert scurries after it, dragging his tiny pride with him. His friend follows. You make a note to set another vinegar trap tomorrow, knowing full well it'll fail like all the others. Downstairs, someone groans. Then silence. You lean against the wall and exhale slowly. You're bone-tired. Your hair smells like smoke. Your back feels like it's 300 years old. And your soul, well, it left about 4 clients ago. And yet, there's a strange calm in this hour. The clients are gone. The madness paused. The city outside is dark and still, like the world's holding its breath. You eat what's left of the figs the bishop's nephew brought. They're dry. Possibly older than you. But they're sweet, and they're yours. You lie back down and pull a blanket over yourself. Thin, fraying, but better than nothing. Tomorrow, it starts again. But for now, You let your eyes close. Even a medieval prostitute gets a few hours of peace, assuming the rats don't start a duel. At last, sleep comes, not gently, not gracefully, but like a sack of flour to the head. Your body gives out before your mind finishes listing everything that aches. Your dreams, as always, are absurd. You're in a castle, somehow clean, wrapped in silk, and reclining on a bed that doesn't crunch when you move. There are grapes. There's music. A man with all his teeth is reciting poetry that doesn't rhyme love with dove. You sip wine that doesn't taste like boiled socks. It's bliss. And then, naturally, someone starts screaming. You jolt awake, smacking your head against the low beam above your straw mattress. The same beam you forget exists every single night. You curse under your breath, already knowing who the culprit is before your eyes adjust. Gertrude. Again. She's outside your door arguing with the madam. Something about a nobleman, a missing shoe, and an accusation involving 2 ducks and a chamber pot. You try to ignore it. You bury your face in the straw, but that only earns you a nose full of hay and something that might be a beetle. The screaming continues, followed by a crash. Then someone yells, "You said you were barren." Ah. So it's that kind of night. You sit up, eyes bleary, heart pounding like you've just survived a siege. You consider going back to sleep, but the odds of that now rank somewhere between unlikely and only if someone hits you with a lute. The candle is out. The air is cold. Somewhere in the darkness, Rupert the rat is chewing something that sounds suspiciously like fabric. Probably your good shift. You get up, wrap yourself in your cloak, more patch than cloth, and poke your head into the hallway. Beatrice is sitting cross-legged at the end of the corridor, eating a turnip like it's an apple, and watching the chaos unfold with all the concern of a cow chewing cud. "I give it 5 more minutes," she says, gesturing to the brawl. Then someone gets slapped with a candlestick. You nod, sigh, and return to your bed. Dreams are clearly off the menu tonight, but if you're lucky, the madness will quiet soon. And maybe, just maybe, Rupert will leave your sock alone. Dawn peeks through the shutters like a nosy neighbour with terrible timing. It's not golden or gentle. It's grey, cold, and smells faintly of mildew and regret. You sit up slowly, because moving too quickly might remind your spine that it's been used as a springboard for a merchant with no rhythm. The straw mattress has left another series of lines across your cheek. Medieval embroidery, courtesy of poverty. The hallway is quieter now. No more screaming. No more duck-related allegations. Just the muffled sound of someone snoring in the pantry and the distant splash of a chamber pot being emptied into the alley. The tanners are already at work. The stench wafts in, politely uninvited. Time to clean. The back room is a battlefield. The sheets are in a state of emergency. The candle wax has dripped into someone's boot, and the only thing that smells worse than the bed is the pillow. There's a single coin wedged in a floorboard crack, your tip from Sir Gilbert the Moist, who apparently thought subtlety involved hiding his money like a squirrel. You gather the linens and haul them downstairs to the washtub, where Marjorie is already elbow-deep in misery. She's humming a folk song about drowning a cheating husband. You respect the theme. The water is cold. You scrub like a woman trying to erase memories, not stains. The wine from the bishop's nephew is clinging to the fabric like sin. Someone's lost earring floats to the top. It's not yours. You pocket it anyway. Beatrice wanders by with a broom and a look that says she's mentally on a ship to Venice. The madam is tallying up last night's earnings, muttering curses at the ink that won't flow. Or perhaps just life in general. Someone burned breakfast. Again. The bread is hard enough to qualify as a weapon. By the time you're done scrubbing, your fingers are numb, and your soul has officially detached for a brief vacation. You hang the linens on a line that's seen more flapping than a flock of pigeons during mating season. The sun rises higher. The city begins to stir. Another day looms. You look at the beds, now cleanish. The floor, mostly swept. Your face in a cracked mirror. Same as always. Ready or not, the door will open again soon, and someone will ask for something exotic. The linens are hung, the floor swept, and your hands smell faintly of lye and disappointment. The sun is officially up now, which means the real work, the pretending, the smiling, the endless parade of men who think calling you "milady" makes it romantic, is just around the corner. You've slept for maybe 2 hours. Your hair is a bird's nest. Your back aches like you've been trampled by a particularly clumsy mule. But you're upright, your bodice is mostly laced, and you've found a cleanish scarf to tie around your hair. That's what passes for winning here. Outside, the market stalls are opening. You hear the butchers yelling about kidneys, the fishmonger cursing at a cat, and the sound of hooves clattering down the cobblestones. Life in the city continues, oblivious, chaotic, and oddly comforting in its predictability. Inside, the brothel smells like stale beer, candle wax, and lemon peel someone shoved in a corner to trick the nose. The madam is barking orders with the energy of someone who's had too much vinegar and not enough sleep. Gertrude is snoring in a chair, head tilted at an angle that suggests mild possession. Beatrice is poking at her latest flea bite like it personally insulted her. You eat a crust of bread with hard cheese and a fig that's seen better centuries. You sip something warm that might be tea, or might be yesterday's water reheated with hope. It burns your throat. You drink it anyway. And then you do the one thing they never expect from a woman like you. You laugh. Just once, quiet and sharp, at the absurdity of it all. At the bishop's nephew and the knight in muddy armour. At the merchant with molasses and the man who paid you in poultry. At Rupert the rat and your poem that caught fire. Because somehow you're still here, still standing, still surviving, still finding a way to keep going, even if that means wringing out sheets, dodging drunken serenades, and pretending you're exotic for men who can't spell the word. You tie your scarf tighter, square your shoulders, and head toward the door. It's a new day, and someone, somewhere, is about to make a very weird request. You'll be ready. In the ancient Persian world, scent was far more than personal indulgence. It was spiritual alchemy. To walk into a Persian garden or palace was to enter a world saturated with fragrance. The very air was considered sacred, and so the Persians made sure it carried the scent of roses, saffron, jasmine, and myrrh. They believed that a beautiful aroma was the signature of paradise, and earth was only tolerable when it mimicked heaven. Perfume in Persia wasn't just worn, it was lived. Bathhouses were infused with rosewater steam. Mosques were sprinkled with incense before prayers. Even letters between lovers might be dusted with powdered ambergris or sprayed with attar, leaving a sensual whisper behind. This wasn't vanity, it was philosophy. Persians believed that the human soul was influenced by what the body absorbed, and that included smell. A good scent could calm the nerves, inspire poetry, or draw the attention of angels. A bad scent, meanwhile, was considered a moral failing. What's often forgotten in the West is that long before the French developed Chanel No. 5, the Persians had already mastered the art of distillation. They didn't just crush flowers and hope for the best. They engineered early alembic stills, devices that used heat and condensation to extract the essence of plants. The father of this technique? Avicenna, the legendary Persian polymath. His method for extracting rose essence laid the groundwork for modern perfumery. But fragrance wasn't just the domain of scientists and royalty. Street vendors sold small vials of rose oil and orange blossom water. Travelling merchants carried musk from Tibet and frankincense from Arabia. It was a sensual economy, built not just on luxury, but on the Persian philosophy that beauty and scent were necessary for a balanced life. To the Persians, fragrance wasn't an accessory. It was identity. It defined how you entered a room, how you were remembered, and how you expressed your presence, both to the living and to the divine. A scent could bless, seduce, or heal. And if your perfume lingered in the air long after you'd left, that wasn't just chemistry. That was immortality. If there's one scent that defines Persian perfumery, it's rose. Specifically, the damask rose, cultivated in the mountainous regions of Iran for centuries. But Persians didn't simply crush petals and rub them on their skin. They sought purity, the very soul of the flower, and they invented the means to extract it. The breakthrough came with steam distillation, a method pioneered by the Persian physician and philosopher Avicenna around the 10th century. His technique revolutionized the way scent was captured. Instead of mashing petals into oil or steeping them in wine, Avicenna's method involved gently heating rose petals with water, then collecting the vapor, which was rich with aromatic compounds. That vapor condensed into rosewater, golab, a fragrant elixir that soon became one of Persia's most precious exports. Rosewater wasn't just for perfuming the body. It was sprinkled in homes, poured into fountains, used in food and drink, and even offered to guests as a sign of welcome. It cooled the skin, refreshed the spirit, and was believed to protect against disease, both physical and spiritual. In Sufi mysticism, rosewater symbolized divine love, and its use in ritual cleansing ceremonies echoed this deeper meaning. But rose wasn't the only star. The same distillation method was used to extract the essence of orange blossoms, jasmine, lavender, and even bitter herbs. The goal was always the same: to create a scent that could do more than smell good. It had to speak to the heart, uplift the soul, and bring the body into balance. This process wasn't a quick job either. Harvesting roses had to be done at dawn, when the petals were richest in oils. Workers, often entire families, would gather the blossoms by hand, and within hours they were loaded into copper stills. The distillation itself was a slow, meditative task, more sacred than industrial. Persian cities like Kashan, Shiraz, and Isfahan became legendary for their perfume artisans. Travellers came from as far as India, Byzantium, and the Arab world to witness the rose festivals and buy pure attars. Some would swear that a single drop of Persian rose oil on a silk handkerchief could retain its fragrance for decades. Persians didn't just bottle scent. They bottled emotion, memory, and beauty itself. To the Persians, fragrance was more than pleasure. It was prayer. From royal ceremonies to everyday devotions, scent played a central role in rituals both sacred and secular. The air of a Persian home wasn't complete without a gentle haze of oud smoke, frankincense, or myrrh curling through the halls like invisible silk. And this wasn't just to impress guests. It was believed that pleasant aromas could summon divine favour and ward off evil. In Zoroastrianism, the dominant religion of ancient Persia before the Islamic period, fragrance was an offering to Ahura Mazda, the supreme god. Fires were kept burning in temples, not only for light and warmth, but for purification. Into these flames, priests would throw bundles of fragrant woods and herbs, sandalwood, thyme, and storax resin, to sanctify the space and carry prayers upward. The smoke was considered a holy vehicle, transporting the faithful's words to the divine. When Islam took root in Persia, the role of scent only deepened. The Prophet Muhammad himself praised perfume as one of life's blessings, and Persian scholars and traders quickly became masters of incense blending. Mosques were perfumed before Friday prayers, and personal hygiene, including the use of fragrance, became both a spiritual and social duty. But these rituals weren't confined to temples or palaces. In daily Persian life, scent marked beginnings and endings. Births were celebrated with rose water, weddings were bathed in the aroma of orange blossom, and the dead were wrapped in perfumed shrouds. Even books and prayer beads were sometimes anointed with delicate oils, because every object, no matter how humble, deserved a bit of paradise. The art of burning bukhor, or incense, became a skill passed down through families. Women, in particular, curated their own secret blends of woods, resins, and spices, each with a purpose: to calm the mind, attract a lover, or clear bad energy. These weren't just perfumes. They were intentions, wafting through the air like invisible prayers. So whether through rosewater sprinkled at dawn or sacred smoke drifting through a twilight courtyard, the Persians didn't just fill their lives with scent. They wove fragrance into the very fabric of time. In the courts of Persian kings, perfume wasn't just elegance, it was politics. Fragrance became a language of power, refinement, and prestige, carefully crafted to impress, seduce, and intimidate. The royal palaces of dynasties like the Achaemenids, Sassanids, and later the Safavids were awash in scent, not by accident, but by design. Silk drapes were perfumed. Floors were sprinkled with rosewater. Even ink used in royal decrees was sometimes scented with saffron or sandalwood. For a Persian Shah, smelling good wasn't a luxury. It was a statement. His body, his clothes, even the cushions on his throne had to exude divinity. Subjects believed that a ruler's scent revealed his moral character. A fragrant king was one blessed by the heavens, a foul-smelling one, clearly cursed. Royal perfumers were held in the highest esteem. These were not simple apothecaries. They were chemists, poets, and confidants. They worked behind thick velvet curtains, surrounded by crushed petals, copper stills, and scrolls of ancient formulas. Their job was to compose signature scents for each member of the royal family, subtle enough to seem natural, but powerful enough to leave an impression after just one encounter. Courtly perfumes often included rare ingredients: ambergris from the ocean, civet from wild cats, oud from infected agarwood trees, and musk extracted from Himalayan deer. These were blended with floral waters, herbs, and spices into thick attars and delicate oils. The finished products were stored in jewel-encrusted bottles, hidden in chambers as guarded as royal treasures. Perfumed gifts were also part of diplomacy. Persian ambassadors would present foreign courts with vials of exotic scents, wrapped in silk and tied with golden thread. It was a gesture of sophistication and subtle dominance. Here, the gift seemed to say, is a whiff of civilization. But the crown jewel of Persian court fragrance was the Rose Festival of Kashan. During this annual event, court ladies would walk through the rose fields at dawn, gathering blooms for fresh distillation. The rose water from this ceremony would be reserved for the royal household, and a vial might be worth more than gold. In Persian court life, fragrance didn't just sweeten the air. It defined identity, demonstrated power, and cloaked ambition in the delicate veil of flowers. In Persian poetry and romance, scent was the first kiss. Before a lover spoke, their presence was known by the fragrance that arrived ahead of them, a trail of jasmine, rose, or amber that lingered like a secret. In Persian culture, where modesty often restrained physical expression, perfume became the most intimate language of desire, and those who mastered its use could seduce without ever touching. Lovers exchanged vials of perfume the way others exchanged rings or letters. A single drop behind the ear, on the wrist, or within the folds of a veil could speak volumes. Women wore oud and jasmine oil beneath their hair to create an aura that moved with every turn of the head. Men rubbed sandalwood paste into their beards, believing it made them both irresistible and respectable. But fragrance wasn't just for dates and dalliances. It was preparation. Persian bathhouses, known as hammams, were the stage for transformation. After hours of scrubbing, steaming, and exfoliating, men and women would emerge into cool rooms where attendants applied fragrant oils with slow rhythmic movements. The body became a canvas for scent, rose oil for softness, civet for mystery, clove and cardamom to heat the blood. Poets like Hafez and Rumi filled their verses with perfume metaphors. A beloved wasn't just beautiful. She was sweeter than musk, or so fragrant that the rose bowed before her. To smell a lover's scarf, long after they'd gone, was a form of holy longing. In many tales, the memory of a scent, not a kiss or glance, is what haunted the heart. This olfactory seduction extended to clothing. Robes were perfumed using a technique called gilaf, where garments were placed in wooden trunks filled with scented smoke. When worn, the fabric released its aroma slowly, like a whisper at close range. Even letters carried perfume. Lovers might seal notes with wax melted over rose water or tuck dried jasmine into the folds. In a society where virtue and discretion were prized, perfume offered a loophole, a way to be bold without breaking the rules. You couldn't flaunt skin, but you could leave a room fragrant enough to stir every imagination. and in that lingering trail, love bloomed. Invisible, intoxicating, unforgettable. Behind every unforgettable Persian scent was a master of the invisible, the perfumer. Known as attar, or attargar, these artisans weren't mere vendors. They were chemists, herbalists, and poets rolled into one, with knowledge passed down through generations like a family heirloom. Working in cramped, fragrant workshops tucked behind bazaars or nestled inside garden courtyards, they crafted emotions drop by drop. The job of a Persian perfumer required obsession. There was no blueprint, only instinct, trial, and the memory of centuries. Every ingredient had its own personality. Jasmine was shy, best blended at night. Saffron was temperamental, needing just the right balance to avoid overpowering. And musk? That was the troublemaker, potent, erotic, and costly enough to cause palace intrigue. And attar's shelves held hundreds of tiny bottles, some cloudy, some glowing gold, others nearly black. These contained essences of rose, orange blossom, myrrh, cardamom, vetiver, coriander, and even unusual extracts like pomegranate skin or burnt almond shell. Each was labelled in delicate Persian script, with notations like good for the heart, for joy, or to attract the beloved. Creating a perfume blend was as much ritual as recipe. The perfumer might begin with a base note, something heavy and grounding like oud, and build upward with floral or spicy middle tones. The final touch? A top note designed to dazzle in the first seconds, citrus peel perhaps, or a whisper of mint. These formulas were never written down. They were remembered in the body, like a song. In some cases, a perfumer's reputation was so strong that nobles and poets commissioned custom scents, tailored to their mood, season, or current heartbreak. "Make me a perfume for forgetting," one might request. Or, "I want to smell like spring on the edge of a storm." The attar would nod, retreat behind a curtain, and begin the alchemy. The result wasn't just a smell, it was a feeling, bottled, refined, and distilled into soul. These artisans rarely signed their work, but their creations lived on long after. One drop could change the air in a room, one whiff could awaken longing. In a world where beauty fades and gold tarnishes, a good scent, crafted by the right hands, became timeless. Step into a Persian bazaar, and your senses are immediately ambushed by colour, sound, and above all, scent. The marketplace wasn't just for spices, silks, or silver. It was a living museum of perfume. Fragrances floated on the air like gossip, drawing customers not with shouting but with invisible trails of rose, clove, and smoke. Perfume vendors, often nestled between spice merchants and apothecaries, displayed shelves lined with glass flasks in every hue, amber oils, ruby-hued elixirs, pale golden attars. These weren't sealed products with brand names. Each bottle was open for testing. Want to try before you buy? The merchant would dab a little rose oil on your wrist, wave a fan gently, and wait for your eyes to widen. And yes, bargaining was part of the ritual. But with perfume, haggling had its own etiquette. You didn't just argue price, you discussed ingredients, origin, quality, and even mood. "This one," the vendor might say, "smells like the night after rain." Another, "fit for a queen on her wedding day." You weren't buying a scent, you were buying a story. The most prestigious markets were in cities like Isfahan, Kashan, and Shiraz, each known for specific scents. Kashan had its world-famous rose water. Shiraz was legendary for orange blossom and wild herbs. Isfahan's perfumers experimented boldly, blending oud with dried apricots or cinnamon bark with violet. Local pride played a role too. Merchants would brag, "Ours is the purest, not watered down like those charlatans in Samarkand." Even travellers from afar wrote home in awe. Medieval Arabic, Indian, and even European chroniclers described Persian perfume bazaars as dreamlike, a place where perfumes were weighed like gold, and each shop felt like a shrine to luxury. But these weren't only places of commerce. For many, visiting the perfume stalls was part of a weekly ritual. To refresh their personal scent, buy gifts for loved ones, or simply stand and inhale. Elders chose grounding, woody oils. Young men picked fiery, spicy blends to impress. Brides-to-be stocked up on jasmine and rose. In the heart of the bazaar, surrounded by chaos, there was always that small, silent moment. A drop on the wrist, a deep breath in. And for a second, just one, the world smelled like heaven. Long before perfume was bottled and sold in glossy boutiques, Persian scholars were treating scent like science. In fact, Persia's contribution to perfumery wasn't just poetic or cultural, it was foundational to chemistry itself. The art of perfume making was deeply tied to alchemy, medicine, and early pharmacology. In the medieval Islamic Golden Age, many of the most brilliant minds weren't only physicians or astronomers, they were also perfumers. Chief among them was Avicenna, the legendary Persian polymath of the 10th and 11th centuries. His experiments with steam distillation, especially his work with rose petals, helped establish modern methods for extracting essential oils. He didn't see fragrance as mere indulgence. To him, scent had therapeutic potential. Rosewater could soothe headaches. Saffron-based attars were believed to lift melancholy. Musk was prescribed to stimulate the heart. These weren't superstitions. They were studied treatments, documented in texts that spread across the Islamic world and into Europe. The Persian term for alchemy, chemia, described the transformation of one substance into another. But in perfumery, this transformation was spiritual too. Taking a handful of petals and turning it into a drop of essence was a small miracle, and early scientists treated it with the same reverence as turning lead into gold. Perfume laboratories, often attached to madrasas or hospitals, used complex glassware for distillation and filtration. Students learned the boiling points of herbs, the volatility of spices, and the solvent properties of oils. They catalogued which scents evaporated quickly, like citrus, and which ones lingered, like ambergris. Over time, this knowledge evolved into a system, the pyramid of top, middle, and base notes that perfumers still use today. But science didn't kill the soul of scent. It elevated it. Scholars wrote that fragrance could clear the mind before prayer, or create harmony between body and spirit. Even rulers patronized scientific perfume experiments, eager to blend luxury with discovery. Through this fusion of reason and romance, Persia gave the world something rare, a tradition where perfume was not frivolous or feminine, but formidable. It stood at the crossroads of medicine, mysticism, and mathematics. And every drop of attar became a distillation not just of flowers, but of centuries of thought. Though empires rise and fall, some legacies cling to the wind. The Persian perfume tradition, born in gardens, refined in courts, perfected in laboratories, still lingers today, not just in the Middle East, but across the globe. You can find its fingerprints in every corner of the fragrance world, from luxury French perfumers to street-side attar stalls in South Asia. If a bottle contains rose, oud, jasmine, or saffron, there's a good chance it whispers with a Persian accent. The techniques Persian artisans refined, like steam distillation, scent layering, and oil blending, became the foundations for modern perfumery. Western scholars translated Persian texts on botany and alchemy. Avicenna's rosewater method was replicated in Italy, France, and eventually the global cosmetics industry. Even today's niche perfumers borrow Persian formulas, describing their creations as inspired by Shiraz or blended in the tradition of ancient Persia. But the legacy isn't just scientific, it's emotional. The Persian philosophy of fragrance, as a form of prayer, poetry, and identity, endures. In Iran today, it's still common to offer rosewater to guests, to perfume prayer mats, to scent new clothes before a wedding. The bazaar culture remains alive, with modern attars sold in tiny gold-capped bottles, each one tied to memory, mood, and meaning. You can still find artisans in Kashan who rise before dawn to gather damask roses, just as their ancestors did 1,000 years ago. The Golabgiri festival, a celebration of rose distillation, draws thousands of visitors each year. all eager to inhale the living heritage of a civilization that turned fragrance into an art form. Even in diaspora communities, from Los Angeles to Berlin, Persian households carry these traditions forward. Perfume is part of storytelling. A grandmother dabs rosewater behind her ears. A mother spritzes orange blossom before a celebration. A child grows up believing that to smell beautiful is to be prepared, for joy, for prayer, for life. In the end, Persia's perfume legacy isn't just bottled, it's breathed. Passed from hand to hand, heart to heart, it refuses to fade. Like a drop of attar on silk, it lingers, subtle, seductive, sacred, and eternal. Before the baptismal waters of 988 CE, before cathedrals and icons, the people of Kievan Rus lived in a world ruled by wind, fire, and ancient gods. Their faith was not written, but remembered, carved into wooden idols, sung around bonfires, and whispered in the rustling of trees. Religion was woven into daily life, and every force of nature had a name and personality. Lightning, that was Perun, god of thunder and war, the Slavic answer to Zeus. The earth itself, a motherly spirit, fertile and ever-watching. The forests, full of creatures, both real and imagined, that could either protect or punish. This wasn't some fringe belief system. Paganism in Kievan Rus was structured and serious. Each tribe had its own rituals and guardian deities, but some gods were universal. Perun stood at the top, worshipped especially by the military elite. Dazbog, the sun god, represented life and abundance. Veles, god of cattle, trade, and the underworld, was beloved by farmers and merchants alike. These deities didn't dwell in temples, but in sacred groves, rivers, and carved idols placed at crossroads and on hills. Rituals included feasting, music, and sacrifices, sometimes animals, occasionally rumours of humans. It was raw, local, and deeply spiritual. When Prince Vladimir first came to power in the late 10th century, he leaned hard into this old religion. In fact, he tried to unify his diverse subjects through it. He erected a grand pantheon of pagan gods on a hill in Kiev, with Perun at the centre. Offerings were made, rituals performed, and Vladimir, known then for his appetites more than his theology, hoped to use religion as a tool of statecraft. But it wasn't working. Paganism, for all its power, lacked central authority. It was too fragmented, too tribal. And worse, it made Kievan Rus look uncivilized in the eyes of the great empires. Byzantium, the Islamic caliphates, even the Christian kingdoms of the West. If Vladimir wanted legitimacy, trade alliances, and political prestige, he needed something more than thunder gods and goat sacrifices. So while the people sang to Perun and danced in the fields, Vladimir began to look outward, to the faiths of neighbouring superpowers, and wonder, what if the gods of old weren't enough anymore? Vladimir, long before sainthood, was the very image of a pagan prince, bold, ruthless, and insatiable. The youngest son of Sviatoslav I, a hardened warrior prince, Vladimir wasn't even supposed to rule. His early years were spent in the rugged north, governing Novgorod, a city of traders and raiders. But when civil war broke out after his father's death, Vladimir didn't hesitate. He fled into exile, rallied Norse mercenaries from across the Baltic, and returned with steel and fury. By 980 CE, Kiev was his, soaked in blood, but under his banner. The newly crowned Grand Prince was a force of nature. He ruled like a pagan god himself, erecting wooden idols to Perun, offering sacrifices, and maintaining a palace filled with concubines, by some accounts, hundreds. His personal life was legendary for its debauchery. He married repeatedly, fathered countless children, and indulged in a lifestyle the medieval chroniclers didn't even try to romanticize. They simply called him lascivious. And yet, he was also clever, calculating in his diplomacy, and aware that raw power wouldn't be enough to hold his realm together. Vladimir's challenge wasn't just uniting diverse Slavic tribes under one crown. It was that his realm sat between empires, and was vulnerable to all of them. The The Byzantines to the south saw Kievan Rus as uncultured and barbaric. The Volga Bulgars, recently converted to Islam, were expanding influence through trade and missionaries. Western Latin Christendom was also watching. Vladimir understood something most of his subjects didn't. Spiritual alignment was geopolitical strategy. Religious identity wasn't just about gods, it was about prestige, literacy, trade, and legitimacy. Without it, Rus would remain a backwater of feuding chieftains and shallow alliances. With it, Vladimir could elevate his rule to imperial stature. Paganism offered no scriptures, no clergy, and no binding moral code beyond tribal loyalty. But the great religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, came with books, buildings, and bureaucracies. In other words, structure. And so, in the middle of his rule, this brutal, lusty warlord began to rebrand himself. Not out of guilt, not from spiritual crisis, but from ambition. The man who once sacrificed goats to thunder gods started exploring something far more calculated: salvation through empire, not piety. Prince Vladimir didn't convert because of a miracle. He converted like a man sealing a trade deal, carefully, cynically, and with a keen eye for long-term gains. Somewhere around the year 986, he began to entertain offers from the world's major religions, not out of devotion, but as a ruler looking to upgrade his state. If Kievan Rus was going to join the club of empires, it needed a spiritual identity that others would respect. So he did what any shrewd leader might do. He sent out a fact-finding mission. According to the primary chronicle, Vladimir dispatched envoys to examine the religions of neighbouring powers. First came Islam, practiced by the Volga Bulgars to the east. It was monotheistic, disciplined and widespread. But there was one glaring problem. There is no joy, the envoys reported. No wine. Vladimir, known for his legendary drinking, allegedly declared, "Drinking is the joy of the Rus. We cannot exist without it." Islam was off the table. Next, his ambassadors visited the Latin Christians in Germany. The religion had power, but the ceremonies were underwhelming. "We saw no beauty there," they said. The envoys were not impressed. Then they travelled to the Khazars, Jews who followed Mosaic law. But their lack of a homeland seemed like a bad omen to Vladimir, who dismissed the idea, asking, "If your God has rejected you, how can I worship him?" Finally, the envoys reached Constantinople. There, in the magnificent Hagia Sophia, they witnessed the Eastern Orthodox liturgy in full splendour. Incense rising, choirs echoing beneath gold mosaics, the clergy adorned like emperors. The envoys were spellbound. "We did not know whether we were in heaven or on earth," they reported back. "There, God dwells among men." This wasn't just religion. This was theatre, architecture, divine authority all wrapped into one. Orthodoxy radiated power, and the Byzantine Empire, with its rich history and formidable prestige, suddenly looked like the right horse to bet on. Vladimir was sold. Not because of piety, but because orthodoxy offered him what paganism never could: imperial legitimacy, international recognition, and a shot at real greatness. He had chosen his faith, but he still had one demand left before signing on the dotted line. He wanted a Byzantine princess. Prince Vladimir had made his decision. Eastern Orthodox Christianity would become the official faith of Kievan Rus. But adopting the religion wasn't enough. He wanted something more tangible, more dynastic, a Byzantine princess, no less than the sister of the reigning emperors Basil II and Constantine VIII. Her name was Anna Porphyrogenita, and she was imperial royalty, born in the purple, a living symbol of legitimacy. There was just one problem. She was off limits. Byzantine princesses didn't marry foreign rulers. They married emperors, and sometimes not even them. To the Byzantines, Kievan Rus was still a land of axe-swinging barbarians, not worthy of their bloodline. Vladimir's request was politely declined, so naturally he responded in the most diplomatic way possible. He invaded Crimea. In 988 CE, Vladimir launched a campaign against the Byzantine outpost of Chersonesus near modern-day Sevastopol. The siege was brutal and effective. Once the city was under his control, he sent a clear message to Constantinople. "Give me the princess, and I'll give you your city back." It worked. The Byzantines, facing a revolt at home and desperate for military aid, reluctantly agreed to the terms. But there was a price. Vladimir had to be baptized first. He accepted. And in a twist that blurred the line between politics and salvation, he was baptized not in Kiev, but in Chersonesus, the very city he had just captured. According to the primary chronicle, Vladimir underwent a sudden transformation after baptism. He supposedly regained his sight, abandoned his concubines, and embraced monogamy. The tale is likely embellished. After all, this is the same prince who once built a pagan temple decorated with human heads. But the symbolism mattered. The wild man of the north was now a Christian ruler, cleansed and crowned by the Orthodox Church. Soon after, Princess Anna arrived, and the two were married. It was a union not just of bodies, but of empires, sealing the bond between Kievan Rus and Byzantium. Vladimir had played his cards perfectly. He didn't just convert his people. He married into the empire that shaped his new faith. Christianity wasn't just salvation. It was a weapon, and Vladimir had just used it to rewrite history. Vladimir's personal baptism was just the beginning. Now came the real challenge, converting an entire people, most of whom had no intention of giving up their gods. The Slavs of Kievan Rus had worshipped Perun, Velez, and Dazbog for generations. Temples stood in every major city. Rituals were deeply embedded in the rhythm of life. You didn't just tell people to stop believing, especially not in a society where religion and tribal identity were practically the same thing. But Vladimir wasn't asking. Shortly after returning from Chersonesus, he ordered the destruction of the great pagan idols in Kiev. The most dramatic was the statue of Perun, the thunder god. It was tied with ropes, whipped by soldiers, and dragged through the streets before being tossed into the Dnieper River, the same river that would become the centerpiece of the coming transformation. Then, Vladimir summoned the people. According to the primary chronicle, he instructed the entire population of Kiev, men, women, and children, to gather on the banks of the Dnieper for a mass baptism. It wasn't an invitation, it was a decree. Priests stood at the river's edge, chants filled the air, icons were lifted high, and thousands of bewildered citizens were led into the water, some willingly, many not. It was less spiritual epiphany than state-mandated ritual. For most, it was their first exposure to Christian liturgy, and it came in the form of cold river water and imperial chants they couldn't understand. Yet something profound happened. Whether from fear, awe, or momentum, the people submitted. A new religious identity was being forged, not through persuasion, but through immersion. The river that once served as the city's artery for trade and travel now became a baptismal font for an entire civilization. After Kiev, the campaign spread to other cities. Novgorod, Suzdal, and Pskov saw similar mass baptisms, sometimes met with resistance, sometimes embraced as a royal order not worth defying. Pagan temples were dismantled, crosses were raised, wooden churches popped up like spring grass. It wasn't a peaceful transition, but it was decisive. In a single generation, the Slavic spiritual landscape shifted from earth and sky gods to icons and incense. Christianity, carried by the current of the Dnieper, had arrived, by decree, by force, and by water. Christianity may have been declared the state religion of Kievan Rus, but the spirits of the old world didn't vanish overnight. The idols were gone, the Dnieper had run its course. But in the forests, in the fields, and in the whispers of village elders, the old gods still stirred. For centuries, Slavic paganism had shaped how people viewed the world. The spirits of the home, known as domovoi, were still believed to guard hearth and family. The rusalka, a water spirit, continued to haunt rivers and lakes in folklore. And Perun, though toppled from his pedestal, remained a name spoken in fear during storms. The church might have baptized the bodies, but the minds and hearts of the people clung to older, deeper rhythms. Rather than stamp out these beliefs completely, early Christian missionaries and priests took a different approach: fusion. They baptized the pagan calendar along with the people. Agricultural festivals, solstice rituals, and fertility rites were given new Christian meanings. The pagan spring celebration became Easter. The midwinter fire feasts transformed into Christmas. Slavic gods were replaced with saints, some even suspiciously resembling their pagan predecessors. The Orthodox Church in Kievan Rus was pragmatic. It understood that if it pushed too hard, it could fracture the fragile unity Vladimir had just forged. So instead of purging the past, it absorbed it, cloaking old rituals in new symbols. A fertility charm became a prayer to the Virgin Mary. A thunderous offering became a candle lit for Saint Elijah, a Christian stand-in for Perun himself. Folk Christianity emerged, a strange but enduring blend of Orthodox theology and ancestral memory. In the countryside, peasants would still bury bread in the earth to ensure a good harvest, even as they crossed themselves and prayed. Holy wells were still visited, offerings left for unseen spirits. Crosses were worn next to ancient amulets. For the church, this syncretism was a headache, but it was also a victory. Christianity had survived the transplant by taking root in the old soil. It didn't erase the pagan world. It grew around it, like vines on a fallen statue. The gods of old were gone, but they had not been forgotten. They had simply changed clothes. After the Dnieper baptism and the destruction of idols, Vladimir didn't just stop at spiritual reform. He wanted to reshape Kievan Rus into a reflection of the great empire he had just allied himself with, Byzantium. If Rus was to be Christian, then it would not be a half-hearted affair. It would be majestic, imperial, and unmistakably orthodox. And so began one of the most ambitious cultural makeovers in medieval history. Byzantine clergy, architects, and artisans poured into Kiev, bringing with them scrolls, relics, liturgical chants, and sacred art. In place of wooden shrines, stone churches began to rise. The most prominent was the Church of the Tithes, constructed with imported Byzantine materials, and consecrated with the grandeur of Constantinople's ritual. It was the first stone church in Rus, and a bold statement. Kiev was no longer a frontier town. It was becoming a second Constantinople. Alongside these sacred structures came a wave of new knowledge. Greek books were translated into Old Church Slavonic. The Cyrillic alphabet, developed earlier by Saints Cyril and Methodius for Slavic peoples, was embraced, laying the foundation for literacy, record-keeping, and theology in the native tongue. Monasteries began to appear, not just places of worship, but centers of education, culture, and political influence. Vladimir sponsored the construction of schools, eager to educate a new class of clerics, scribes, and administrators who could navigate both the holy and the imperial. Orthodox Christianity was hierarchical, highly ceremonial, and centralized, traits that appealed to a ruler trying to unify a diverse land. But this transformation was not just aesthetic, it was strategic. By adopting Byzantine religious customs, court rituals, and even fashion, Vladimir ensured that Kievan Rus was no longer seen as a barbaric hinterland. Diplomatically, it was now a legitimate player on the world stage. Constantinople had lent its prestige, and Kiev wore it proudly. Icons replaced totems, processions replaced bonfires, incense filled the air where once the smoke of sacrifice rose. The same people who once danced around idols now marched in liturgical processions, chanting hymns they barely understood but slowly made their own. Vladimir hadn't just baptized a people. He had set the stage for a civilizational shift, turning Kiev from a pagan capital into the glowing spiritual sibling of Byzantium. When Vladimir the Great died in 1015, he was no longer remembered as a warlord with too many wives and idols. He had been transformed, in image, in memory, and eventually, in name, into Saint Vladimir, equal to the apostles. But behind the incense and hagiographies was a man who had executed one of the most effective political pivots in medieval history. He didn't just adopt Christianity, He used it as strategy, as cement, and as a symbol. His baptism brought immediate stability. The once disjointed Slavic tribes of Rus began to see themselves as part of a greater whole, not just bound by blood, but by faith and ritual. Clergy now helped govern, just as much as military men. Monasteries acted like early bureaucratic hubs, and the idea of Tsar as God's chosen ruler, borrowed from Byzantine theology, slowly began to take root, elevating the role of prince from mere warlord to divine administrator. Vladimir's children inherited more than his crown. His son, Yaroslav the Wise, would build on his father's foundation, transforming Kiev into a beacon of culture, law, and learning. Under Yaroslav, the first legal code was written, more churches were built, and ties with Western Europe were expanded through marriage alliances and diplomacy. But none of this would have been possible without the Christian identity that Vladimir had secured. The canonization of Vladimir served both spiritual and political purposes. He became the model of a righteous, enlightened ruler, even if his early life had been anything but saintly. The church needed a patron saint founder, and Vladimir, despite his former temple to Perun and harem of concubines, fit the mold perfectly after baptism. He had burned idols, built churches, and baptized a nation. That was enough. For future rulers of Rus, Vladimir's path became a blueprint. Align with religion to legitimize your rule. Use faith to unify. Cloak political ambition in sacred vestments. It worked for Vladimir, and it would work for his descendants all the way to the Tsars of Muscovy and beyond. His sainthood wasn't just earned in heaven, it was engineered on earth. A pagan prince became a Christian patriarch. A ruthless ruler became a religious icon. And in doing so, Vladimir ensured that his name would echo through the liturgies and legends of the Slavic world for centuries to come. The Christianization of Kievan Rus in 988 wasn't just a one-time baptism. It was the start of a centuries-long intertwining of faith and power, one that would define not only Rus, but the future of the entire Eastern Slavic world. Vladimir had planted the seed, and what grew from it would become a spiritual empire, even more enduring than the political one. The Orthodox Church became more than a religious institution. It became the soul of the state. Bishops advised princes. Monasteries held land, trained scribes, and preserved chronicles. Religious processions replaced tribal rituals. Even war banners bore crosses instead of animal totems. The very idea of what it meant to be civilized in Rus became bound to Christian identity, modelled after the great Orthodox cities like Constantinople. But this closeness came at a price. As the church became reliant on the princes for protection, the princes in turn used the church to reinforce their own legitimacy. This was no separation of church and state. It was a symbiosis. Princes appointed bishops, funded monasteries, and demanded spiritual support for political decisions. In return, they were portrayed as divinely appointed, chosen by God, like Vladimir himself. Even when Kievan Rus later fragmented and eventually fell under Mongol domination, the Orthodox faith held firm. It became a cultural anchor during foreign rule, a reminder of identity in the face of devastation. While cities burned and princes submitted to khans, the church preserved history, language, and belief. The metropolitan seat moved from Kiev to Vladimir, then to Moscow, which would one day claim the title of Third Rome. In that vision, Moscow saw itself as the heir to Constantinople, especially after the actual fall of Byzantium in 1453. The marriage of Ivan III to Sophia Palaeologina, niece of the last Byzantine emperor, symbolically transferred the imperial Orthodox mantle. And who was invoked in this new Russian Orthodox identity? Saint Vladimir, the baptizer, the nation builder. His statue now stands above the banks of the Dnieper in Kiev, where once Perun's idol was tossed into the water. Vladimir holds a cross in one hand, and in the other, the legacy of an empire where church and crown were never truly separate. 988 wasn't just the Christianization of a people, it was the beginning of an Orthodox civilization, one that would survive war, invasion, and empire, always flowing from that moment on the riverbank. when the soul of Rus was submerged and reborn. In the late 9th century, the lands of the Eastern Slavs were wild, tribal, and soaked in blood. Forests stretched endlessly. Rivers served as highways and battlegrounds. Pagan gods ruled the heavens, and clan rivalries often ended with axes, not treaties. It was in this chaotic world, somewhere around the year 890, that Olga was born. Most likely in Pskov, a northern Slavic town nestled along the Velikaya River, her early life is shrouded in mystery. No chronicler wrote down her childhood deeds. But what we do know is this. Olga would become one of the most formidable women in Slavic history. At the time, the powerful Rurikid dynasty was consolidating control over the scattered Slavic tribes. Led by Norse-descended princes, this dynasty ruled over Kievan Rus, a growing confederation of city-states that thrived on trade, tribute, and terror. Around her teenage years, Olga married Igor of Kiev, the son of Rurik, the dynasty's founder. The marriage wasn't romantic, it was strategic. She became a princess, tied to a ruling elite that had one goal: dominate and unify the fragmented Slavic world under a single iron rule. But don't imagine Olga as a passive figure standing behind her husband. Even as a young consort, she observed the workings of statecraft. She travelled with Igor, saw how tribute was collected, how uprisings were crushed, how loyalty was purchased or punished. She watched how men ruled, and took mental notes. This was not a woman content with embroidery and incense. She was studying survival in a world that offered no mercy. The society around her was deeply pagan. The Slavic pantheon was full of volatile gods like Perun, the Thunderer, and Veles, the god of trade and the underworld. Superstition governed daily life. Tribal alliances were maintained with animal sacrifices and blood oaths. For a woman to rise in such a setting was almost unthinkable. Yet fate and vengeance would soon thrust Olga into a position no woman before her had held, not just as a regent, but as a ruler with absolute authority. All it would take was one brutal act, and everything would change. In the year 945, everything changed. Prince Igor of Kiev, Olga's husband and ruler of Kievan Rus, was conducting a tribute collection from a neighbouring Slavic tribe known as the Drevlians. This was routine business, or so he thought. Igor had already extracted payment once, but returned to demand more. The Drevlians, insulted and enraged, had other plans. They seized the prince and, in a stunningly brutal execution, tied him between two bent birch trees and released them, tearing him apart, limb from limb. Back in Kiev, Olga received the news. Her husband was dead. Her son, Sviatoslav, was still a child, too young to rule. And she, a woman in a male-dominated, militarized pagan world, was expected to step aside, marry again, or act as a symbolic regent while real power passed to warlords or tribal elders. Olga did none of those things. Instead, she seized absolute control. From the moment of Igor's death, the Drevlians believed they could take advantage of her vulnerability. They sent a delegation of 20 nobles to Kiev, proposing that Olga marry their prince, Mal, and thereby make peace. It was bold, even insulting. The Drevlians assumed Olga would be too weak to refuse, or too afraid to retaliate. They had, after all, just killed her husband. What could a woman possibly do? Olga smiled, accepted the offer, and told the Drevlian envoys they would be honoured with a bath before seeing her. The moment they entered the bathhouse, she had the doors barred and the building set on fire, burning every man alive. This was not diplomacy. This was a message. Olga was not to be tested, but she wasn't finished. She invited a second Drevlian embassy to Kiev under the pretense of formal acceptance. When they arrived, she arranged a grand feast and had her soldiers slaughter them once they were drunk. In the span of days, the supposed grieving widow had orchestrated the systematic execution of nearly every Drevlian negotiator. The Drevlians had misjudged Olga. They expected meekness. What they got instead was methodical vengeance. and she was just getting started. Olga had made her opening move: burn the envoys, butcher the diplomats. But her vengeance against the Drevlians was far from complete. Those first executions were not the end. They were the invitation to something far darker. The Drevlian leaders had hoped to control her through marriage. Now they had only ensured their own extinction. Olga next marched on the Drevlians' capital, Iskorostan, the very city where Prince Igor had met his gruesome end. But she was patient. Instead of launching an immediate assault, she sent a chilling request: that the Drevlians provide her with a proper funeral feast for her late husband. Still under the illusion that Olga was seeking peace, the Drevlians obliged. They prepared a grand celebration. When Olga and her forces arrived, the people of Iskorostan greeted them with hospitality, unaware they were feeding their executioners. As the feast reached its peak and the wine flowed freely, Olga gave the signal. Her soldiers rose and slaughtered over 5,000 drunken Drevlians on the spot. Again, she didn't stop. The survivors fled behind the fortified walls of Iskorostan, hoping to outlast her siege. Olga's forces surrounded the city. Weeks passed. Supplies dwindled. The Drevlians refused to surrender, expecting that Olga would either retreat or starve them into submission. But Olga had other ideas. Ideas involving birds. Yes, birds. According to the primary chronicle, Olga sent a message into the city. "Why suffer further? Submit to me, and I shall spare you. I ask only a token of peace. 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each household." The Drevlians, desperate and relieved, agreed. They gathered the birds and sent them out. What they didn't know was that Olga's forces had tied burning sulphur and cloth to the birds' legs. When released, the birds flew back to their nests, in the thatched roofs of the city. Within moments, Iskorostan was on fire. As people fled the flames, Olga's army captured them or cut them down. Some were killed, others enslaved. A few were left to pay heavy tribute. Iskorostan, once proud and defiant, was now nothing but cinders. Princess Olga had avenged her husband, not in haste but with cold, systematic annihilation. And with her enemies in ashes, she turned her attention to ruling. With the Drevlians annihilated, Princess Olga of Kiev stood unchallenged. But her vengeance was only the beginning. Now came the truly astonishing part. She didn't step aside. She didn't remarry for protection. She ruled, directly and absolutely, in a world that barely had a word for female ruler. Her son Sviatoslav was still a child, too young to take the throne. Traditionally, regents, especially female ones, served as placeholders. But Olga wasn't a placeholder. She wielded power with the same ruthless efficiency she used to incinerate Iskorostan, and she ruled smart. Her first priority was reforming the tribute system, the very issue that led to her husband Igor's death. Rather than send war bands to extract unpredictable payments from unruly tribes, Olga instituted a standardized system of taxation and tribute. She designated fixed collection points, called pogosts, and appointed officials to oversee them. In essence, she created a bureaucracy, a move unheard of in the chaotic political structure of early Rus. This may not sound dramatic, but it was revolutionary. Olga's reforms brought consistency, stability, and wealth to Kiev. For the first time, the state functioned on something other than sheer intimidation. She also organized administrative units across Rus, helping to centralize power and build a foundation for law. And then there was diplomacy. Olga maintained firm control over internal matters, but she also turned her attention abroad. Most notably, she opened up relations with the Byzantine Empire, then at its height. She travelled to Constantinople, where she was received not as a regent or guest, but as an equal sovereign. Emperor Constantine VII was reportedly so impressed by her intelligence and bearing that he recorded her visit in his imperial writings. Despite her bloody beginnings, Olga was no mere warlord. She understood image. She knew that political power needed structure, diplomacy, and yes, reputation. She worked tirelessly to secure her son's future reign, knowing that the stability she enforced would determine how long the Rurikid dynasty would last. And through all this, she remained unmarried, unheard of for a royal widow. It wasn't about romance or alliances anymore. It was about legacy. Princess Olga had already proven she could burn down cities. Now, she was building a kingdom that could last. By the mid-950s, Princess Olga had not only avenged her husband and stabilized Kievan Rus, she had elevated herself into a major political figure on the international stage. Her next move would mark one of the most fascinating chapters of her life. A diplomatic mission to Constantinople, the jewel of the Byzantine Empire. It was a bold step. Few rulers, let alone women, personally visited the imperial capital, and yet Olga sailed south down the Dnieper, crossing the Black Sea with her delegation to meet Emperor Constantine VII's Porphyrogenitus, one of the most powerful monarchs in the Christian world. According to the Byzantine emperor's own writings, Olga was graceful, poised, and terrifyingly sharp. She refused to be treated as a mere vassal or supplicant. She demanded full honours, and received them. Constantine was so taken with her that he allegedly proposed marriage, only for Olga to politely trap him in his own theology. She requested baptism before such a union could be considered. Constantine agreed, personally sponsoring her conversion to Christianity. She was baptized with great ceremony, taking the name Helena, likely in honor of the emperor's own wife. But when Constantine pressed the issue of marriage again, Olga coolly reminded him that he was now her spiritual godfather, making any union between them spiritually incestuous. The emperor was stunned. Olga had checkmated him with his own religion, and walked away with diplomatic gifts, prestige, and a newfound connection to Byzantium. But her baptism was more than political theatre. Olga had experienced something genuine in the Christian liturgy. The values, the order, the majestic rituals. They appealed to her intellect and her vision for Rus. She returned home not only as a princess, but as the first Christian ruler in Kievan Rus. However, her people, and her son, Sviatoslav, were still deeply pagan. Olga didn't force conversion. She ruled with caution, encouraging Christianity but not imposing it. She was planting seeds, not wielding swords. In a land still ruled by thunder gods and blood oaths, Olga returned from Constantinople with a cross, a vision, and a long game in mind. And that game was just beginning. Princess Olga returned to Kiev not just as a ruler but as a Christian, a woman baptized in the grandest city in the known world. But what she came home to was not awe or enthusiasm. It was resistance. Her people, including her own son Sviatoslav, were still deeply pagan. The gods of fire, thunder and earth were alive and well in the rituals of daily life. To most of her court, Olga's new faith looked foreign, weak, even foolish. And yet she never flinched. She didn't start by building cathedrals or threatening punishment. Instead, Olga took a soft, strategic approach. She invited missionaries. She supported the construction of modest churches in Kyiv. She personally practiced her faith in full view, attending services, honouring Christian feast days, and sponsoring priests. But she never demanded her people follow. She understood something many later rulers did not. Change takes time, and timing is everything. Still, it was a lonely path. Her son, Sviatoslav, respected her authority, but refused to convert. As he matured into a military leader, he became the embodiment of the old Slavic warrior ideal, fearless, pagan, and uninterested in foreign gods. He told his mother plainly, "I do not understand the faith. Let others mock me." He tolerated her Christianity, but he would not embrace it. Even within her own household, Olga was a minority of one, and yet she didn't waver. She played the long game, trusting that the foundations she laid would one day support something bigger. She modelled Christian rulership with patience and diplomacy, not force. She forged stronger ties with Byzantium, quietly preparing the groundwork for what she knew could be a civilizational shift. In many ways, her reign as a Christian ruler in a pagan court resembled her early years of rule, calculated, careful, and fierce in its discipline. She knew that one misstep could turn her people against her, but she also knew the power of example. If she could not convert her son, perhaps one day her grandson might listen. And so Olga, the firebrand widow who once burned a city with birds, now led a spiritual rebellion not with fire, but with faith. As Sviatoslav came of age, Princess Olga gradually stepped back from direct rule. But make no mistake, her shadow still loomed large over the court. While she embraced the cross, her son marched under the banner of the old gods, and his rule was everything Olga had tried to evolve beyond. Sviatoslav was a warrior king in the purest sense. He had no interest in bureaucracy, no patience for diplomacy, and no regard for the faith his mother had imported from Constantinople. He was said to sleep on the ground, dress like his men, and wage wars with terrifying efficiency. His campaigns stretched east and south. He crushed the Khazars, fought the Volga Bulgars, and tangled with the Byzantine Empire itself. Where Olga had built systems, Sviatoslav chased glory. Where she had traded with empires, he raided them. And while Olga tried to weave Christianity into the state, Sviatoslav treated it as a distraction. Pagan rites continued. Perun was still worshipped. The Christian churches she had built stood quietly in the background, often ignored. But even amid this return to old-school rulership, Olga remained a pillar of order in the realm. She ran court matters when Sviatoslav was away at war, which was often. She maintained ties with Byzantium, preserved the treasury, and kept the capital functioning. She was no longer the sovereign, but she was still the stabilizing force behind the throne. It is telling that despite his deep respect for his mother, Sviatoslav refused baptism. He feared looking weak in front of his men, many of whom saw Christianity as soft, a religion of peace and submission, unsuitable for warriors. Sviatoslav made it clear, "I will not adopt the faith, but I will not stop you from practicing it." And so, the strange coexistence continued. A Christian mother ruled beside a pagan son. 2 generations with 2 very different visions for Rus. But it was clear that only one of them was thinking about the future. Olga saw what Sviatoslav could not, that the old ways were not enough to hold Rus together forever. Paganism had power, but no spine. Christianity offered structure, legacy, and alliances far beyond the steppe. All she had to do now was wait. In the year 969, Princess Olga of Kiev breathed her last. She was nearly 80 years old, a remarkable age for her time, and even more remarkable given how many wars, uprisings, and betrayals she had outlived. When she died, she wasn't merely a dowager or a mother of the prince. She was the matriarch of Kievan Rus, revered by both Christians and pagans alike. But her death also marked the end of something fragile, the delicate balance she had maintained between her vision for Rus and her son's warrior agenda. According to the primary chronicle, her final wish was clear. She wanted to be buried as a Christian. Sviatoslav honoured that request. Though still pagan himself, he respected her too deeply to deny her a Christian burial. No pagan rites, no burning, just the cross. She died disappointed in one sense. She had failed to convert her son, but she had done something far more powerful. She had tilled the ground where the seeds of Christian Rus would soon bloom. Her grandson, Vladimir, watched everything. The ceremonies, the diplomacy, the moral gravity with which Olga ruled. And when his turn came, he would finish what she started. Olga's death left a vacuum. Without her, the Christian mission in Rus seemed stalled. Churches stood, but mostly empty. Missionaries preached, but few listened. The court returned to its old ways. It might have ended there. Olga remembered only as a brutal widow who once burned birds and tricked emperors. But history had other plans. The Byzantine Empire never forgot her. In Constantinople, she was remembered as the first royal woman of Rus to receive baptism, and as one who had matched their own diplomats step for step. Her name carried weight. Her story spread. And in Rus, as the years passed, her legend grew, not just as a ruler, but as a spiritual pioneer. It would take another generation before Rus officially embraced Christianity. But when it did, they didn't look to missionaries or Byzantines for inspiration. They looked back at Olga, the princess who had ruled with fire and died with a cross, and when the church made her a saint, they weren't canonizing a pious martyr. They were canonizing a tactician, a visionary, a mother of nations. Years after her death, Princess Olga of Kiev was canonized by the Eastern Orthodox Church as Saint Olga, equal to the Apostles. It was an extraordinary title, one reserved not for monks or martyrs, but for figures who had radically transformed the spiritual course of nations. And that's exactly what Olga did. She didn't preach sermons, she didn't die for her faith. But what she did do was rarer still. She played the long game. She bridged two worlds, one pagan and brutal, the other imperial and Christian, and stood alone in the middle of them, unwavering. Her canonization wasn't simply for her conversion. It was for her vision. Before Olga, Kievan Rus was a loosely bound land of tribal loyalties, blood feuds, and gods who demanded sacrifice. She brought structure, introducing bureaucracy, taxation, diplomacy, and long-term statecraft. She brought vengeance, yes, but it was controlled, political vengeance. When she destroyed the Drevlians, it wasn't just justice, it was a lesson. After Olga, there was no longer any question that women could rule, not just in regency, but in absolute authority. Her reign set a precedent that rippled through Slavic history. She didn't ride behind a prince, she commanded, she burned cities, she negotiated with emperors, she reshaped a state and never married again, because she didn't need to, and spiritually, she paved the path that would change everything. Her grandson, Vladimir the Great, would go on to adopt Orthodox Christianity for all of Kievan Rus in 988. When he ordered the mass baptism in the Dnieper River, he wasn't starting from scratch. He was standing on the foundation that Olga had quietly built, brick by brick, church by church, act by act. Vladimir is credited as the baptizer of Rus, but the one who carried the torch through the darkness was Olga. Her legacy is everywhere, in Orthodox liturgy, in Slavic folklore, and in the stories of female leaders who defied the odds. She was brutal and brilliant, vengeful and visionary, a flame that did not burn out, but rather lit the path for a nation's soul. Princess Olga of Kiev was no ordinary saint. She was the mother of empire, baptized in faith, baptized in fire, and her legend still lingers, like smoke after a siege, like incense in a chapel.